and unsurpassed, penetrating and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, Dekai. Today I'd like to read a chapter from Old Path, White Clouds by Thich Nhat Hanh. It's a wonderful book. Each chapter is a different story of the Buddha's life, and they're just very easy to read and very poetic, with a lot of sudden depth. All of a sudden, you're reading along, and then all of a sudden, it drops in a really beautiful way. So this chapter is called "The Finger is Not the Moon," chapter 32. And then after reading, we'll go back and I'll go over some of the lines. One afternoon, Shariputra and Moggallana brought a friend, the ascetic Dighankara, to meet the Buddha. Dighankara was well known in the area. He also happened to be Shariputra's uncle. When he learned that his nephew had become a disciple of the Buddha, he was curious to learn about the Buddha's teaching. When he asked Shariputra and Moggallana to explain the teachings to him, they suggested he go directly to the Buddha. Dighankara asked the Buddha, "Gautama, what is your teaching? What are your doctrines? For my own part, I dislike all doctrines and theories. I don't subscribe to any at all." The Buddha smiled and asked, "Do you subscribe to your doctrine of not following any doctrines? Do you believe in your own doctrine of non-believing?" Somewhat taken aback, Dighankara replied, "Gautama, whether I believe or don't believe is of no importance." The Buddha spoke gently. Once a person is caught by belief in a doctrine, they lose all their freedom. When one becomes dogmatic, he or she believes their doctrine is the only truth and that all other doctrines are heresy. Disputes and conflicts all arise from narrow views. They can extend endlessly, vastly wasting precious time and sometimes even leading to war. Attachment to views is the greatest impediment to the spiritual path. Bound to narrow views, one becomes so entangled that it is no longer possible to let the door of truth open. Let me tell you a story about a young widower who lived with his 5-year-old son. He cherished his son more than his own life. One day, he left his son at home while he went out on business. When he was gone, brigands came and robbed and burned the entire village. They kidnapped his son. When the man returned home, he found the charred corpse of a young child lying beside his burned house. He took it to be the body of his own son. He wailed in grief and cremated what was left of the corpse. Because he loved his son so dearly, he put the ashes in a bag which he carried with him everywhere he went. Several months later, his son managed to escape from the brigands and made his way home. He arrived in the middle of the night and knocked at the door. At that moment, the father was hugging the bag of ashes and weeping. He refused to open the door, even when the child called out that he was the man's son. He believed his own son was dead and that the child knocking at the door was some neighborhood child mocking his grief. Finally, his son had no choice but to wander off on his own. Thus, father and son lost each other forever. You see, my friend, if we are attached to some belief and hold it to be the absolute truth, we may one day find ourselves in a similar situation as the young widower. Thinking that we already possess the truth, we will be unable to open the door of our minds to receive the truth, even if the truth comes knocking at our door. Digadnaka asked, but what of your own teaching? If someone follows your teaching, will they not become caught in narrow views? My teaching is not a doctrine or a philosophy. It is not the result of discursive thought or mental conjecture like various philosophies which contend that the fundamental essence of the universe is fire, water, earth, wind, or spirit, or that the universe is either finite or infinite, temporal or eternal. Mental conjecture and discursive thought about truth are like ants crawling around the rim of a bowl. They never get anywhere. My teaching is not a philosophy. It is the result of direct experience. The things I say come from my own experience. You can confirm them all by your own experience. I teach that all things are impermanent and without a separate self. This I have learned from my own direct experience. You can too. I teach that all things depend on all other things to arise, develop, and pass away. Nothing is created from a single original source. I have directly experienced this truth, and you can also. My goal is not to explain the universe, but to help guide others to have a direct experience of reality. Words cannot describe reality, only direct experience enables us to see the true face of reality. Digamnaka exclaimed, "Wonderful, wonderful, Gautama. But what would happen if a person did perceive your teaching as a dogma?" The Buddha was quiet for a moment and then nodded his head. Digamnaka, that is a very good question. My teaching is not a dogma or a doctrine, but no doubt some people will take it as such. I must state clearly that my teaching is a method to experience reality and not reality itself. Just as a finger pointing at the moon is not the moon itself. An intelligent person makes use of the finger to see the moon. A person who looks at the finger and mistakes it for the moon will never see the real moon. My teaching is a means of practice, not something to hold onto or worship. My teaching is like a raft used to cross the river. Only a fool would carry the raft around after they had already reached the other shore, the shore of liberation. Yamnaka joined his palms. "Please, Lord Buddha, show me how to be liberated from painful feelings." The Buddha said, "There are 3 kinds of feelings: pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. All 3 have roots in the perception of mind and body. Feelings arise and pass away like any other mental or material phenomena. I teach the method of looking deeply in order to illuminate the nature and source of feelings, whether they are pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. When you can see the source of your feelings, you will understand their nature. You will see that feelings are impermanent, and gradually you will remain undisturbed by them arising and passing away. Almost all painful feelings have their source in an incorrect way of looking at reality. When you uproot erroneous views, suffering ceases. Erroneous views cause people to consider the impermanent to be permanent. Ignorance is the source of all suffering. We practice the way of awareness in order to overcome ignorance. One must look deeply into things in order to penetrate their true nature. One cannot overcome ignorance through prayers and offerings. Shariputra, Moggallana, Kaladaya, Nagasamala, and Chana all listened as the Buddha explained these things to Digannaka. Shariputra was able to grasp the meaning of the Buddha's words the most deeply. He felt his own mind shine like a bright sun. Unable to conceal his joy, he joined his palms and prostrated himself before the Buddha. Moggallana prostrated himself as well. Then Digannaka, moved and profoundly impressed by all that the Buddha had said, also prostrated himself before the Buddha. Kayadala and Chana were deeply touched by this scene. They felt proud to be associated with the Buddha, and their faith and trust in his way were further strengthened. A few days after that, Queen Vidahi and an attendant visited and made food offerings to the Sangha. She also brought a young plumera sapling and planted it beside the Buddha's hut in remembrance of the story he had told the children in the palace courtyard. Under the Buddha's guidance, the community made an ever greater progress along the path. Shariputra and Moggallana were like shining stars with their keen intelligence, diligence, and leadership abilities. They worked with Kondana and Kassapa to organize and guide the Sangha. However, even as the Sangha's reputation was growing, some people began to speak ill of the Buddha and his community. Some of these rumors were spread by members of religious factions who were jealous of the king's support of the Sangha. Lay disciples who often visited Bamboo Forest expressed concern over what was being said. Apparently, some people in Rajagaha were distressed that so many young men from wealthy and noble families were becoming bhikkhus. They feared that soon all the young men would abandon their homes and there would be no more suitable husbands for the noble young women in the area. Entire family lines could be discontinued, they warned. Many bhikkhus were not pleased when they heard these things. But when the Buddha was informed, he calmed both the laity and the bhikkhus by saying, "Don't worry about such things. Sooner or later, all such talk will die down." And it did. In less than a month, there was no more talk about such trifling fears. So at the beginning of this chapter, there's a line where it is said, "Why don't you go and meet directly with the Buddha rather than just hearing the teachings from some of his disciples?" And even though this is probably just a perfectly reasonable thing that happened, there is this lovely instruction in there. Why don't you go directly to the Buddha? And for us, I think that is a teaching. Why don't we go directly to the teachings themselves? Directly to the teachings themselves for us is to settle into our Zazen practice. Hear the teachings and feel them directly for ourselves. I remember when I first came across Buddhism, it was a book that was given to me. For a couple of months, I was just reading about Buddhism and really enjoying it, reading about Zen. And then I could feel that that wasn't enough, so I did start meditating, which was great. And then that also felt a little bit like I was still skirting around the edges because I was doing it just in isolation. I was in East Gippsland, so I was somewhere actually geographically remote. And it wasn't until I actually went to a Sangha and met with the teacher face to face, eye to eye, sat with the community in a space with them, that I felt that then I was really going directly to the Buddha myself. Before that, I was kind of having a nice time around the edges, but I wasn't willing to go up there and like pull the whiskers of the tiger and see what happens. So that I think is an instruction for us. Are we really willing to see what these teachings have to offer and have sort of the rug of our delusions pulled out from under us? And I like this bit. It feels like almost like a joke where the Buddha smiles and says, "Do you subscribe to your own doctrine of not following any doctrines? Do you believe in your doctrine of non-believing?" I think that's a very good caution for us, that we can even hold fixed to our views of not being fixed about things. We have to keep on checking, just gently checking with ourselves. Am I shutting my mind off and being rigid, being closed? Or am I being righteous in some way? Just to gently keep checking with ourselves that we're keeping our mind flexible. And then there's this story, this sad story of a father who doesn't recognize his own son because he's so sure that his son has died. And it's a powerful metaphor for how we can have our own thoughts can cloud our vision in such a way that we can't see something that's knocking right at our door. And often that has a strong kind of emotional tone. We might have a strong emotional tone of some sort, that the world is a terrible place, or everybody has it better than me. Any number of thoughts that we have, a kind of tone that clouds the way we see things. So then we can't we're not able to see what's beautiful often. We can't see what's beautiful. We can't see what's true. Often people can't see the interconnectedness. They can't see how we're all profoundly intertwined with each other. Because we have views, we have some fixed views. And there's this emphasis too in this chapter where the Buddha says, "My teaching is not a philosophy, it is the result of direct experience." All through the Buddha's teachings, there's this call to say, find this out for yourself, check this out for yourself. It's a very intelligent teaching in that way. It's a very respectful of us as practitioners, trusting that we can ourselves verify these teachings in our own experience. We have that capacity to verify it for ourselves. And that's what the Buddha wants us to do. That's what all the teachers want us to do. They want us to verify it for ourselves so we know it coursing through our blood ourselves. And like the title of this chapter of the finger pointing at the moon, this is an image that's used quite a lot, not to mistake the finger pointing at the moon for the moon itself. In a lot of ways, it's a call for us just to return to our simple practice of being present, awareness in the present moment, hearing the sounds, seeing the images, feeling the sensations of the breath, rather than just thinking about things. I mean, it's fine to think about things, but not to mistake thinking about reality for reality. Our thoughts about reality are not reality. Whenever we get too enamored by our own thoughts, we are mistaking our thoughts as being like the finger pointing to the moon. We're mistaking it for the moon. So we can enjoy our thoughts and be curious about our thoughts, but be very careful not to think that our thoughts about reality are reality. And he also mentions here about feelings arise and pass away. Even this most simple teaching, to really understand that all our feelings arise and pass away. If we're a little irritated, or we feel a little mistreated, any things that we might be thinking, any ill feeling that we might be thinking about someone else, or that we think they think about us, all of it's just arising and passing. If we can relax with that, we're much less likely to do harm. We can just cultivate a certain patience with our own thoughts and patience with other people's thoughts. We're less likely to impulsively do something that will cause harm. And the sort of main erroneous view that we have, you could say, well, there's a few, I guess, they're all related to each other. We have this erroneous view that things are permanent. Everything that we experience, everything we experience through our senses is impermanent, but we have this erroneous view that it's permanent, including an idea about ourself, continuity about ourself. And the Buddha says here, when you uproot erroneous views, suffering ceases. Which is a pretty powerful thing to say, that if we could uproot all our erroneous views, our suffering would cease. We would be completely at ease. Even in hardship, we would still find a way to deal with the hardship with a kind of grace. And of course, that benefits others. It's not just for our own sake that we would do that, that we aspire for that for ourselves. It's because that quality of not suffering personally liberates us to be beneficial to others. And then there's the last part of the story where some people speak ill of the Buddha, and the Buddha models for us a kind of patience with that, and as an example of how feelings come and go. And he just says, don't worry about such things. Sooner or later, all such talk will die down. Which doesn't mean, of course, that sometimes, someone can be falsely accused of a crime, for example, and maybe will be incarcerated. It's not that all injustice will just go away. Injustice can sometimes continue for a person's whole lifetime. But that kind of false accusations and so on, it doesn't have any real power in the long run. We don't need to let it kind of hook onto us. It's probably one of the most painful things is to be falsely accused, or even to be defamed when you have done something wrong. It is very unpleasant as a social creature to feel somehow ostracized in any way, even just within your own family or in your own community. So in the tiny little times when that happens to us, it's a very good opportunity, really good opportunity. I'd encourage you to notice in the little ways that it happens when someone misunderstands you and says something to you that's not accurate, to really breathe with it, to just develop patience with it. Breathe in, breathe out, and not react. Just let it settle and think, oh, this is a great opportunity. And then when we're patient like that, we're much more likely to respond in a way that doesn't do harm to ourselves or to others. So being misunderstood is a great opportunity. I think I might have time to read just a little bit from The Miracle of Mindfulness by Thich Nhat Hanh, one of his very early books. It was 1975, this one was published. Just about breathing. Because we can study the Buddha's teachings and we can try and apply them to our lives. But sometimes that can feel a little bit cluttering in the mind. The one thing that we can always do, is just bring our attention back to a single breath. We can just always do that. It's this incredible gift. In any moment, we can just pause and breathe in and breathe out. And that's like going directly to the Buddha when we do that. So here's just a little bit from Thich Nhat Hanh on breathing. In the meditation sessions I recently began for non-Vietnamese, I usually suggest various methods that I myself have tried, methods that are quite simple. I suggest to beginners the method of following the length of the breath. The student lies back down on the floor. Then I invite all the participants to gather around so I can show them a few simple points. Although inhaling and exhaling are the work of the lungs and take place in the chest area, the stomach area also plays a role. The stomach rises with the filling of the lungs. At the beginning of the breath, the stomach begins to pull down or to pull out. But after inhaling about 2/3 of the breath, it starts to lower again. Why? Because your chest and stomach, between your chest and stomach, there is a muscular membrane, the diaphragm. When you breathe in correctly, the air fills the lower part of the lungs first, before the upper lungs fill with air. The diaphragm pushes down on the stomach, causing the stomach to rise. When you have filled your upper lungs with air, the chest pushes out and causes the stomach to lower again. This is why in former times, people spoke of the breath as originating at the navel and terminating at the nostrils. So I was experimenting with this a little bit, breathing in and feeling the diaphragm pulling down and causing the stomach to, when we're sitting, the stomach to come forward a little bit. And then this bit I had never really thought through, that after we fill the lower lungs, we then fill the upper lungs and the chest rises. And when the chest rises, then the stomach goes in again a little bit. And then when we breathe out, the stomach goes in even a little further. So we could just do that when our mind is just a little caught up with something, and so that we're focusing on the thoughts inside our mind and not noticing the birds and not noticing the sky, not noticing the objects around us. We're just a little preoccupied with our thoughts. We could just pause in that moment. Take a few breaths and just feel that relationship between the lungs, the diaphragm, and the stomach, and the chest rising. So one last bit that I'll read. Your breath should be light, even, and flowing like a thin stream of water. Your breath should be very quiet, so quiet that a person sitting next to you cannot hear it. Your breathing should flow gracefully like a river, like a water snake crossing the water, and not like a chain of rugged mountains or the gallop of a horse. To master our breath is to be in control of our bodies and minds. Each time we find ourselves dispersed and find it difficult to gain control of ourselves by different means, the method of watching the breath should always be allowed or should always be used. The instant you sit down to meditate, begin watching your breath. At first, breathe normally, gradually letting your breathing slow down until it is quiet, even, and the lengths of the breath are fairly long. From the moment you sit down to the moment your breathing has become deep and silent, be conscious of everything that is happening in yourself. As the Buddhist Sutra on Mindfulness says, breathing in a long breath, you know, I am breathing in a long breath. Breathing out a long breath, the practitioner knows, I am breathing out a long breath. Breathing in a short breath, you know, I am breathing in a short breath. Breathing out a short breath, you know, I am breathing out a short breath. Experiencing the whole breath body, I shall breathe in. Thus you train yourself. Experiencing the whole breath body, I shall breathe out. Thus you train yourself. Calming the activity of the breath body, I shall breathe in. Thus you train yourself. Calming the activity of the breath body, I shall breathe out. Thus you train yourself. After about 10 to 20 minutes, your thoughts will have quietened down like a pond on which not even a ripple stirs. So that's an appreciation of Thich Nhat Hanh today and all his wondrous teachings and his dozens and dozens of books that I would recommend that you read some of if you haven't. So I'll finish there, and if anyone would like to comment or ask a question,